For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Thabi Madiba. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss whether the ANC can recover lost ground. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Do you think Jacob Zuma's exit from the ANC and the state will see the ANC regaining its lost ground?
You know, it does seem to be regaining ground at the moment, partly because a lot of the opposition's orientation in the Zuma era was focused on Zuma himself. And now Zuma is not there, Zuma is on trial, and it's very hard, it's very hard for them, they're raking up who's paying Zuma's legal fees, for example, which is correct. But they haven't really developed identities which are distinct from Zuma. And you're seeing this particularly in the DA now, where having been united in exposing Zuma, a whole lot of other areas that are problematic for them are emerging in the period prior to their I think the conference starts today or tomorrow. There's a lot of problems in the DA. If you look at they've got lots of structures, and most of those structures are dominated by whites. Now, they say, you know, people are elected on merit. Moody, the Gauteng province leader of the DA, says he would hate to be there because he's black, you know. And I think this idea that you can't take or not taking adequate account of the historical disadvantages that black people have had and giving them the chance. You know, a lot of things you only learn on the job. For example, you cannot learn to interview me by reading a book on interviews. You learn most of it by coming here and doing it in practice. Some people will say to you, know, Thabi, best way to do it is to pause more, go slow, whatever it is. Those are things that you pick up in the course of working. Now, the same thing happens if you join a branch of the ANC or the DA, and they make you first minute secretary, let's say. But when you're minute secretary, which is not a big job, you see the way other people are operating. You're in the thick of things. Now, my impression is that the DA has only recently acquired a lot of black members. I mean, by black, I use Africans, colours, and Indians. And they have not really placed a lot of weight in having them develop into leaders. Now, that doesn't mean that when you put someone in a leadership position that you don't have to have support measures. For example, some people may not know how to use a computer, and it's very hard to put them, say, into media, but they may be very good in speaking. But when they're speaking, you have to see that in addition to speaking on behalf of the DA, they also acquire computer skills. You have to think about these things. You know, one of the things that I've been saying to people is when you are in a non-racial organization, it doesn't mean you're color blind. You must be very conscious of color. Now, when I was in jail, I had not worked with black people in the liberation movement. When I came out in the UDF, I worked with black people, but I had to be very conscious of the fact that I had a background which was very different from the other people with whom I worked. For example, I had academic degrees. The language that I was using, did that disempower people with whom I was working? You see, when you have knowledge, you can either use that knowledge to empower people or to batter them. And I think a lot of people, not just in the DA, they use their big words and all of this to batter people. Now, you can't always find a small word for some things, but you've got to be very conscious of that. You've got to be conscious that when you come to a meeting in your car, someone may have come in lots of buses and taxis and what have you. So I think that the ANC may be recovering ground partly because of the disarray of the opposition parties, EFF as well, having an identity problem. But the ANC under Ramaphosa, it's got its problems. But I mean, after Zuma, anything appears wonderful. And Ramaphosa is doing a lot of things to clean up. And I think let's hope that that continues.
And as we have seen with Ramaphosa's election as the state president and the cabinet that he made last month, and we saw that the investor confidence lifted up. So can this impact the ANC standing up for the election?
Well, you know, if people do invest more, and the rating agencies, I hate it, you know, that everything depends on what the rating agencies think about our politics, what investors think about our politics, what business confidence thinks, because these are very conservative people. They don't believe in empowering the poor and these sorts of things. But that's the reality of the economic situation that we're in, that we are very vulnerable. It was the same when the ANC first won elections. It was a world where America was dominant, all these sorts of things. Now, I think it's very important in practice, whatever we think of having investors and rating agencies have these powers, it's very important that Standard & Poor's, I think it was, lifted the grade above junk status, things like that. And that will help the ANC because a number of people from the middle classes, I think, didn't vote for the ANC in 2016. And a number of workers also didn't, but I think that in places like Gauteng, it's very important for the ANC to draw back that middle class vote, and this investor confidence will help.
And in your article, you write that the ANC that was banned in 1990 to you represented a place where ideas were debated and contested and where strategies and ideas of freedom were up for debate. So can this culture of ideas be recovered?
Well, you know, there's not strong evidence. There's not strong evidence of a lot of debate. You know, they are debating land, but it's really trying to do damage control to try to avoid wholesale land seizures, things like that. So there's a little bit of debate about that. But when I was in the ANC in 1990, you would see young Africans carrying thick books by Gramsci and people like that, or people would be debating ideas, whether you went down to what was called the border region of the Eastern Cape, or you went to KZN, all these places, you'd have a lot of debates. People would be debating about the Freedom Charter. They would not just say the Freedom Charter is our guiding light and all that sort of cliches, you see. There was quite a lot of debate. It can be exaggerated. But in exile and in the country, there had been debate in the 1980s. You know, there used to be something that would start, say, in Lusaka, then it would go to Angola, Mozambique, the same issue. And there was a lot of debate in the ANC. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think there was a lot of ideas floating around. And I'm not sure that it will be easy to recover it because people have lost that for quite a long time. Even in the Thabo Mbeki period, you must remember that there was not there was this preeminence of Thabo Mbeki, and there were people around Thabo Mbeki who diffused what Thabo Mbeki believed in. He himself made some very impressive talks, but the level of debate was uneven. There was a situation, I remember I once went to a National General Council in Port Elizabeth about 2000, and what Mbeki and others were saying was contested from the floor. So there was still a tradition. You know, there were some people, the ANC also consists of a lot of people They don't just take orders, they debate it, they want to argue about things like that. But I think a lot of that has been lost.
And can you explain to us why do you say for many in the ANC, they have the aspiration to acquire wealth?
Well, I think that, you know, for some time, 10 years of Zuma, the way in which you measure your success in the ANC is not by how well you explain National Democratic Revolution or the Freedom Charter, but how many cars you have, how many homes you have, and you get that through positions, through contracts and things like that. And that is the culture of the ANC, which the new leadership either has to undermine, has to fight back against, or continue. And there's a lot of resistance, I think, to removing these things, because at the lowest level, with all the poverty, becoming a joining the ANC, you often do with a view to getting a contract or becoming a councillor, because people are very poor. And so there's going to be a lot of difficulty remedying that.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about whether the ANC can recover lost ground.